Dealer laughed at black woman asking for a luxury car, until her chauffeur pulled up in a Ferrari. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine showroom floor of Premier Motors, Dallas's most exclusive luxury car dealership. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, their light dancing off the polished hoods of million-dollar supercars that sat like sleeping giants waiting for their next owner. The air smelled of leather and expensive cologne, a carefully crafted atmosphere that whispered one thing: only the elite belonged here. Monique Williams stepped through the glass doors at exactly 9:15 a.m., her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the marble floor. She wore a simple navy blazer over dark jeans, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. Nothing about her screamed wealth: no designer handbag, no glittering jewelry, no obvious status symbols. She looked like what she intended to look like, an everyday woman who had wandered into the wrong place. But appearances, as Monique well knew, could be deceiving. "Can I help you?" The voice belonged to Brad Stevenson, a tall man in his early 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His navy suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the Rolex on his wrist caught the light as he approached. Brad had been the top salesman at Premier Motors for 3 years running, and he could spot a serious buyer from a mile away. This woman, however, was clearly lost. "Yes, I'd like to test drive one of your sports cars," Monique said, her voice calm and measured. She gestured toward a gleaming red McLaren 720S that sat in the center of the showroom like a work of art. "That one, specifically." Brad's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, wider than before. "Oh, well, that's actually a very special vehicle. The McLaren 720S starts at around $300,000. He paused, letting the number hang in the air. "Plus taxes and fees, of course." "I understand," Monique replied, her expression unchanged. "I'd still like to test drive it." A soft chuckle escaped Brad's lips before he could stop it. He glanced toward the reception desk where his colleague, Jessica, was watching the interaction with barely concealed amusement. "Ma'am, I appreciate your interest, but we do require proof of... Well, let's just say we need to verify that potential buyers are pre-qualified for this level of investment." "Pre-qualified?" Monique's eyebrow arched slightly. "And how exactly does one become pre-qualified?" Brad's chuckle grew louder, drawing the attention of other staff members. "Well, typically our clients arrive in, shall we say, vehicles that indicate their financial capacity." His eyes swept over her again, taking in her modest appearance. "Do you have any idea what the insurance alone costs on a car like this?" "We're talking about $15,000 a year minimum." Monique nodded thoughtfully. "That does seem reasonable for a car of this caliber." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a simple leather wallet. "Would a down payment help establish my seriousness?" The sight of her worn wallet sent Brad over the edge. He burst into laughter, covering his mouth with his hand as if trying to contain himself. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry. I really am. But this isn't exactly a Honda Civic we're talking about here." He gestured grandly at the McLaren. "This is a supercar. Real supercar money. Not everyone can just walk in off the street and what?" Monique's voice remained steady, but something in her tone had shifted. It carried an undertone of steel that made Brad's laughter die in his throat. "Look, I don't mean any offense," Brad said, his voice taking on a condescending tone that somehow managed to be both apologetic and dismissive. "But maybe you'd be more comfortable looking at something in our pre-owned section? We have some very nice BMWs, some Audis. Much more practical for someone in your situation." The word situation hung in the air like a slap. Around the showroom, other customers, all well-dressed, predominantly white men in expensive suits, had begun to notice the commotion. Some were smirking, others whispering among themselves. A few had their phones out, recording what they clearly expected to be an entertaining scene. Monique took a slow, deep breath. She'd expected this, of course. It was exactly why she was here, standing in this showroom, playing this particular role. But expecting racism didn't make experiencing it any less infuriating. "I see," she said quietly. So you're telling me that I can't test drive a car in this dealership because of my situation? Brad's face reddened slightly. He was beginning to realize that his words might be interpreted in a way he hadn't intended, or perhaps exactly as he'd intended. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just being realistic about what I can afford based on how I look. Monique interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an edge that made Brad take a step back. It's not about how you look, Brad protested, though his eyes said otherwise. It's about being practical. We have insurance requirements, liability issues. I can't just hand the keys to a $300,000 car to someone who walks in off the street without proper documentation. What documentation would you need? Monique asked. Well, Brad scrambled, clearly not having expected the question. Bank statements, proof of income, credit reports, that sort of thing. Standard procedure. Standard procedure? Monique glanced around the showroom at the other customers, none of whom appeared to be filling out paperwork or providing documentation. I noticed that gentleman over there seems to be sitting in the Lamborghini. Did he provide bank statements? Brad followed her gaze to where a middle-aged white man in a polo shirt was indeed sitting behind the wheel of a bright yellow Lamborghini Huracan, chatting casually with another salesperson. That's different. Marcus is one of our regular customers. We know him. Ah, I see. So it's about relationships, not documentation. Exactly. Brad seized on this, apparently thinking he'd found safer ground. It's all about building relationships with our clients over time. Trust, you understand? Monique nodded slowly. Trust. Based on what, exactly? The question seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. Brad opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, apparently realizing that any answer he gave would only dig him deeper into the hole he'd created for himself. You know what? Monique said, reaching into her pocket again. This time, she pulled out her phone. I think I understand perfectly. She glanced at her watch, a simple Timex that had probably cost $30. I have a meeting in 20 minutes anyway. Perhaps I'll try another dealership. As she turned toward the door, Brad felt a sudden panic. What if she was serious? What if she actually did have money, and he'd just blown a potential sale? Wait. Look, maybe we can work something out. Why don't you tell me a little more about what you're looking for? Budget range, intended use, that sort of thing? Monique paused at the door, her hand on the glass handle. She turned back to face him, and for just a moment, Brad caught something in her expression that made him profoundly uncomfortable. It wasn't anger or hurt. It was something far more unsettling. It was pity. You know, Brad, she said, reading his name tag. I think you've told me everything I need to know about Premier Motors. She pushed through the glass doors and stepped out into the morning sunlight, leaving behind a showroom full of curious stares and one very nervous salesman who was beginning to wonder if he'd just made a terrible mistake. Outside, Monique walked slowly toward the street, her mind already racing ahead to the next phase of her plan. She had exactly 18 minutes before her chauffeur would arrive, and she intended to use every one of them. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. It's me, she said when the call connected. Phase 1 is complete. He took the bait perfectly. Are you in position? The voice on the other end confirmed what she needed to hear, and Monique allowed herself a small smile. Brad Stevenson had no idea what he just walked into, but he was about to find out that assumptions, especially the wrong ones, could be very, very expensive. She glanced back at the dealership, where she could see Brad through the glass windows, apparently explaining the encounter to his manager. In 18 minutes, that conversation was going to take a very different turn. The game, as they say, was afoot. 17 minutes later, Brad was still trying to explain the encounter to his manager, Robert Chin, when the unmistakable growl of a high-performance engine echoed through the parking lot. The sound was deep, throaty, and unmistakably Italian, the kind of mechanical symphony that made every head in the showroom turn toward the window. What the hell is that? Robert muttered, squinting through the tinted glass. A sleek black Ferrari 488 Spider glided into the parking space directly in front of Premier Motors, its engine settling into a contented purr. The car was immaculate, its midnight paint job gleaming under the Texas sun like liquid obsidian. Chrome accents caught the light, and the prancing horse emblem on the grille seemed to stare directly into the showroom with aristocratic disdain. "Holy shit!" whispered Jessica from behind the reception desk. "Is that a 488? Brad felt his stomach drop as the driver's door opened with the precise engineering click that only comes from Italian craftsmanship. A tall black man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit emerged from the driver's seat. His movements were fluid, practiced, the kind of confidence that comes from being comfortable with expensive things. He wore aviator sunglasses and a subtle smile, and when he straightened his tie, Brad caught the glint of gold cufflinks. But it was what happened next that made Brad's blood run cold. The man walked around to the passenger's side and opened the door with the ceremonial precision of someone performing a well-practiced ritual. And out stepped Monique Williams, looking exactly the same as she had 20 minutes earlier, except now she was stepping out of a $250,000 Ferrari. "Oh no," Brad whispered. "Oh no, no, no. Who is that?" Robert demanded, his voice sharp with concern. As the general manager of Premier Motors, he built his reputation on ensuring that every potential customer, especially those who arrived in Ferraris, received the kind of treatment that kept them coming back with their wealthy friends. That's the woman I was telling you about," Brad stammered. "The one who wanted to test drive the McLaren." Robert's face went through several color changes in rapid succession. "The one you said couldn't afford?" "I didn't say she couldn't afford it," Brad protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "I just said we needed to verify." "Jesus Christ, Brad." Robert was already moving toward the door. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Outside, the chauffeur, because it was now abundantly clear that's what he was, handed Monique a small leather portfolio from the Ferrari's interior. She accepted it with a gracious nod, the kind of understated gesture that spoke of old money and quiet power. The two exchanged a few words, and the man returned to the driver's seat, keeping the engine running. Monique approached the glass doors of Premier Motors for the second time that morning, but everything had changed. The portfolio under her arm seemed to grow heavier with each step, and her simple navy blazer now looked less like budget shopping and more like the kind of understated elegance that only the truly wealthy could afford. The showroom had gone completely silent. Brad felt beads of sweat forming on his forehead as Monique pushed through the doors. She moved with the same calm composure as before, but now it carried the weight of vindication. Every eye in the showroom was on her, and the expressions on her observers' faces ranged from curiosity to barely concealed panic. "Good morning again, Brad," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement that made his stomach churn. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Robert stepped forward, his best customer service smile plastered across his face. "Ms. Williams," Monique supplied. "Monique Williams." "Ms. Williams, I'm Robert Chen, the general manager. I understand there may have been some miscommunication earlier. Please let me personally ensure that any concerns are addressed immediately." Monique tilted her head slightly, as if considering his offer. "Miscommunication. That's an interesting way to put it." She glanced at Brad, who was now visibly sweating despite the showroom's carefully controlled climate. "Brad here was very clear that I needed to provide documentation of my financial capacity before I could test drive any vehicles. Well, that's certainly not our standard policy for customers who arrive in Ferraris," Monique finished. "Yes, I imagine your policies might be flexible in those circumstances." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Other customers had stopped pretending not to listen, and even the salespeople had abandoned their posts to witness what was clearly becoming a defining moment for Premier Motors. "Ms. Williams," Robert said carefully, "I assure you that all of our customers receive the same high level of service, regardless of..." "Regardless of what, exactly?" Monique's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "Regardless of how they dress? Regardless of what car they arrive in?" or regardless of what they look like. Brad opened his mouth to interject, but Robert shot him a look that could have frozen hell over. I think, Monique continued, opening her leather portfolio, we should discuss what I actually came here for this morning. She pulled out a thick document and placed it on the nearest display table. I represent Meridian Holdings Corporation. We're looking to purchase a fleet of luxury vehicles for our executive transportation program. Robert's eyes widened as he caught sight of the letterhead and the numbers on the first page. How many vehicles are we discussing? 57, initially. A mix of sedans, SUVs, and sports cars. The total budget is approximately $12 million. Monique's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. We've been evaluating dealerships across Texas, and Premier Motors was highly recommended by several of our board members. The silence that followed was deafening. Brad felt like he might actually pass out. However, Monique continued, corporate policy requires that we work only with dealerships that demonstrate consistent professionalism and respect for all potential clients, regardless of their appearance or perceived economic status. She glanced around the showroom, taking in the faces of everyone who had witnessed both her initial humiliation and her current revelation. Based on this morning's experience, I'm afraid Premier Motors may not meet those standards. Robert looked like a man watching his career dissolve in real time. Ms. Williams, please. I'm certain we can resolve any misunderstanding. Brad was simply doing what comes naturally to him. Monique interrupted, her gaze settling on the sweating salesman. The question is whether that behavior reflects the values of this establishment. Outside, the Ferrari's engine continued to purr, a mechanical reminder of power that could drive away at any moment, taking $12 million with it. Monique closed the portfolio with a decisive snap that echoed through the silent showroom like a judge's gavel. I think I've seen enough for today, she said, her voice carrying the finality of a closing door. Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for your educational demonstration of Premier Motors' customer service philosophy. Robert stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. Ms. Williams, please. Give us another chance. Brad's behavior doesn't represent. Mr. Chin. Monique interrupted, sliding the portfolio under her arm. I've been in corporate procurement for 15 years. I've learned that how a company treats someone they believe has no power tells you everything you need to know about their true character. She turned toward the exit, then paused as if remembering something. Oh, and for the record, I wasn't actually planning to make any decisions today. This was merely a preliminary assessment. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in every face, every expression of regret and realization. Consider yourselves assessed. As Monique walked toward the door, she pulled out her phone and spoke quietly into it. Marcus, we're leaving. Take the scenic route back to the office. I need to make some calls. The Ferrari's passenger door closed with the satisfying thunk of German engineering, and within moments, the supercar was gliding out of the parking lot, leaving behind a wake of expensive exhaust fumes and very expensive regrets. Inside the showroom, chaos erupted the moment the Ferrari disappeared from view. What the hell just happened? Demanded Richard Morrison, a regular customer who'd been browsing the Bentley section. Did that woman just walk away from a $12 million deal? Robert ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. Brad, my office. Now. But Brad was already moving, his survival instincts kicking in. Look, I know how this looks, but I was just following protocol. We can't just let anyone. Anyone what? Robert's voice cut through the showroom like a whip. Anyone black? Anyone who doesn't look like they belong in your country club? The accusation hung in the air, and Brad's face flushed red. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I treat all customers the same way. Do you? The question came from Jessica at the reception desk, and her tone suggested she'd been waiting a long time to ask it. Because I've watched you, Brad. I've seen how you decide who gets your attention and who gets directed to the used car lot. Other staff members began shifting uncomfortably, and Robert noticed the pattern immediately. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a much larger problem. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away in the back of the Ferrari, Monique was already executing phase 2 of her plan. She speed-dialed a number she knew by heart. Sarah? It's Monique. Operation Spotlight is a go. Yes, it was exactly as bad as we expected. Actually, worse. The salesman literally laughed at me. Sarah Martinez, Monique's chief of staff and a former investigative journalist, was taking notes on the other end of the line. Did you get it on recording? Marcus has everything. Hidden cameras in his lapel and the car's dash cam caught the whole interaction from multiple angles. Monique glanced at her chauffeur, who nodded confirmation in the rearview mirror. But I need you to dig deeper. I want a full background check on this dealership. Complaints, lawsuits, employee testimonials, everything. Already on it. Sarah replied. I've got our research team pulling records as we speak. What about social media monitoring? Set it up. I have a feeling our friend Brad is going to have some interesting things to say about this morning's encounter. Monique's voice hardened. Men like him don't learn from embarrassment. They double down on their ignorance. Understood. What about the other dealerships on our list? Monique consulted her tablet, scrolling through a list of luxury car dealerships across the Dallas metropolitan area. Continue with the original plan. Premier Motors was always the primary target, but we need to document patterns across the industry. Have Lisa and Janet ready for their visits this afternoon. 2 more surprise customers? Exactly. Same protocol, modest dress, no obvious wealth indicators, requesting test drives of high-end vehicles. If this is systemic, we'll expose all of it. Back at Premier Motors, Robert was discovering that the morning's incident was indeed part of a larger pattern. After dismissing Brad to consider his future with the company, he'd spent the last hour interviewing staff members and reviewing security footage from previous weeks. What he found made his stomach churn. Show me the incident from last Tuesday again. He told Marcus Webb, the head of security. On the monitor, grainy footage showed Brad interacting with a young Latino man who'd inquired about a Porsche 911. The sound quality was poor, but Robert could clearly see Brad's dismissive body language and the customer's obvious frustration as he was guided away from the sports cars toward the used vehicle section. And the woman from last Friday? Another video, this time showing Brad's interaction with a middle-aged Asian woman who'd asked about an Audi R8. Again, the same pattern: condescension, dismissal, redirection to more appropriate vehicles. Jesus, Robert muttered. How long has this been going on? From what I can tell, about 6 months, Marcus replied. Ever since Brad became the top salesman. Success went to his head, made him think he could pick and choose his customers. Robert's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David Kim, a corporate lawyer he'd worked with for years. Saw something interesting on social media. You might want to check Brad Stevenson's Facebook page. Urgent. With growing dread, Robert pulled up Brad's social media profile. The most recent post, uploaded just 20 minutes earlier, made his blood run cold. Just had the most ridiculous encounter at work. Some woman walks in thinking she can test drive a McLaren, dressed like she shops at Walmart. The entitlement is unreal. Thank God for common sense and proper customer screening. Not all heroes wear capes, but some of us wear suits and know how to protect our dealership from time wasters. #Real Talk, #Know Your Customers, #Common Sense. The post already had dozens of likes and comments, most of them echoing Brad's sentiment with varying degrees of racial coding and classist rhetoric. Robert screenshotted the post immediately, then called his legal team. Whatever storm was coming, Premier Motors was about to be right in the center of it. His phone rang again. This time it was the owner of the dealership group, Harold Premier himself. Robert, I just got a very interesting phone call. Harold's voice was tight with controlled anger. Apparently, one of our salespeople just cost us a $12 million corporate contract and then decided to brag about it on social media. Please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding. Robert looked at the screenshot of Brad's post, then at the security footage still frozen on his screen, then at the door that Monique Williams had walked through just hours earlier. I wish I could, sir. he said quietly. But I'm afraid it's worse than that. The investigation was just beginning, but already Robert knew one thing for certain. By the time this was over, Premier Motors would either emerge as a company that took discrimination seriously, or it would become a cautionary tale about the cost of prejudice. Either way, Brad Stevenson's career in luxury car sales was about to come to a very public and very permanent end. 3 days later, at precisely 2:30 p.m., the black Ferrari pulled back into Premier Motors' parking lot, followed by a sleek silver Mercedes S-Class and a pearl-white Escalade. The convoy moved with the quiet confidence of serious money, and every employee in the showroom felt their pulse quicken as the vehicles came to a stop in the VIP parking spaces. Robert had been dreading this moment since Monique's first visit. He'd spent 72 hours in damage control mode, reviewing policies, conducting sensitivity training sessions, and trying desperately to contain the fallout from Brad's social media posts, which had now gone viral with over 10,000 shares and counting. The post had attracted the attention of local news outlets, civil rights organizations, and what seemed like half of Black Twitter. The hashtag Premier Motors discrimination was trending, and the dealership's Google reviews had plummeted from 48 stars to 21 stars overnight. But none of that preparation could have prepared Robert for what stepped out of those 3 vehicles. Monique emerged from the Ferrari wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal business suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, and she wore pearls that caught the afternoon light like captured stars. She looked every inch the corporate executive she clearly was, and Robert felt his stomach drop as he realized how badly they'd misjudged her initial appearance. From the Mercedes came 2 other black executives, a tall woman in her 50s wearing a burgundy power suit and carrying a briefcase that screamed, "Serious business," and a younger man in an impeccably cut navy suit who moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions. The Escalade disgorged what appeared to be a full support team, a woman with a professional camera, a man with a tablet and recording equipment, and another woman who looked like she could negotiate the surrender of a small country. "Jesus Christ," whispered Jessica from behind the reception desk. "It's like the United Nations of corporate power just pulled up." Robert straightened his tie and walked toward the entrance, his best customer service smile feeling more forced than ever. "Ms. Williams, welcome back to Premier Motors. I'm so pleased you decided to return." Monique's smile was polite but distant. "Mr. Chen, thank you. I'd like you to meet my executive team." She gestured to the older woman. "Dr. Patricia Washington, our Chief Financial Officer, and James Mitchell, our Vice President of Operations. My staff will be documenting this visit for our corporate compliance records." The words corporate compliance records hit Robert like a physical blow. This wasn't just a follow-up visit, it was an official corporate investigation with legal implications. Of course, Robert stammered. "Whatever you need. Can I offer you coffee, water, anything at all?" "That won't be necessary," Dr. Washington interjected, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been making boardroom decisions since before Robert was born. "We're here to finalize our fleet procurement decision. I trust the irregularities from Ms. Williams' previous visit have been addressed?" Robert nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. We've implemented immediate policy changes, conducted comprehensive staff training, and taken disciplinary action where appropriate." "Disciplinary action?" James Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are we to understand that the employee in question is still employed by Premier Motors?" The question hung in the air like a trap, and Robert suddenly realized he was walking through a minefield. "Well, we're conducting a thorough investigation." "Mr. Chin," Monique interrupted gently, "perhaps we could speak with Mr. Stevenson directly? I believe he expressed some very strong opinions about my previous visit on social media. I'd be interested in his current perspective." Robert's face went pale. Brad's Facebook post had been screenshot and preserved before he deleted it in a panic, but the damage was already done. The video of Monique's original encounter, combined with Brad's inflammatory social media commentary, had created a perfect storm of public relations disaster. "I'm not sure that would be productive," Robert hedged. "Brad is He's dealing with some personal issues right now. Personal issues? Dr. Washington's tone could have frozen molten steel. Mr. Chin, Meridian Holdings doesn't partner with organizations that consider discrimination a personal issue. We consider it a character flaw that reflects institutional values. Through the showroom windows, Robert could see Brad's car in the employee parking lot. The man had been a nervous wreck since the social media backlash began, jumping at every phone call and flinching whenever anyone mentioned lawsuits or corporate investigations. "Brad!" Robert called across the showroom, his voice carrying a note of forced cheerfulness. "Could you join us, please?" Brad Stevenson emerged from behind a display of luxury SUVs looking like a man walking to his own execution. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. When he saw Monique and her team, he stopped dead in his tracks, his face cycling through several shades of pale. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't expecting Mr. Stevenson," Monique replied pleasantly. "I hoped we might continue our conversation about customer service standards. You seem to have some very definite opinions about proper customer screening procedures." Brad's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Behind Monique, the woman with the camera was recording everything, and the man with the tablet was taking notes with the methodical precision of someone building a legal case. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding," Brad began, his voice shaking slightly. "I was just following standard protocols. Standard protocols that involve laughing at potential customers and making assumptions based on their appearance?" James Mitchell's question was delivered with surgical precision. "No, that's not. I would never." Brad looked desperately at Robert, but his manager's expression offered no comfort. Dr. Washington opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet, swiping to what was clearly a screenshot of Brad's deleted Facebook post. "Mr. Stevenson, would you care to explain this social media post? Specifically, the part where you refer to protecting your dealership from time wasters who dress like they shop at Walmart?" Brad's face went from pale to green. "That was taken out of context. I didn't mean it the way it sounds." "How did you mean it?" Monique asked, her voice still pleasant but carrying an undertone that suggested she was genuinely curious about his answer. The silence stretched for long, uncomfortable seconds as Brad struggled to find words that might somehow dig him out of the hole he'd created. Around the showroom, other customers and staff members had stopped pretending not to listen. Everyone was waiting to see how this confrontation would end. Finally, Brad's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake. I judged you based on things I shouldn't have judged you on. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." Monique nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for that apology, Mr. Stevenson. The question now is whether Premier Motors considers this kind of judgment error a fireable offense or simply a learning opportunity." She looked directly at Robert, and her meaning was crystal clear. The $12 million corporate contract was hanging in the balance, and Brad Stevenson's future employment was the weight that would tip the scales. Robert looked at Brad, then at Monique's executive team, then at the camera that was recording every moment of this corporate disaster. The decision that would determine Premier Motors' future was staring him in the face, and everyone in the room knew it. The silence stretched on, heavy with the weight of consequences, as Brad waited to learn his fate and Monique waited to see what kind of company Premier Motors really was. The silence was broken by the soft click of Monique's briefcase opening. Every head in the showroom turned toward the sound, and Brad felt his knees go weak as she withdrew a sleek tablet and placed it on the nearest display table. "Before we discuss Mr. Stevenson's future," Monique said, her voice carrying the calm authority of a judge about to render verdict, "I think everyone should see exactly what transpired during my first visit." The tablet screen came to life, and suddenly the showroom was filled with the crystal-clear audio and video of Brad's performance 3 days earlier. The hidden camera footage was devastating in its clarity. Every condescending laugh, every dismissive gesture, every moment of barely concealed prejudice was captured in high definition. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry. I really am. But this isn't exactly a Honda Civic we're talking about here. Brad's recorded voice echoed through the showroom, and his present-day face flushed crimson as he heard his own words played back. This is a supercar. Real supercar money. Not everyone can just walk in off the street and… Please, Brad whispered, his voice cracking. Please turn it off. But Monique let the video play, and the entire showroom watched as Brad's discrimination unfolded in real time. Other customers in the footage could be seen smirking and recording with their phones, while staff members looked on with varying degrees of amusement and complicity. When the video reached the part where Brad suggested Monique would be more comfortable looking at used BMWs, Dr. Washington made a sound of disgust that carried clearly across the silent showroom. Maybe you'd be more comfortable looking at something in our pre-owned section? We have some very nice BMWs, some Autos. Much more practical for someone in your situation. The word situation hung in the air like an accusation, and Brad looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. Mr. Stevenson, Monique said as the video ended, you mentioned that this was taken out of context. Could you please provide that context for us? Brad opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. The insurance requirements. We have policies about… About what? James Mitchell interjected, his voice sharp as a scalpel. About verifying that black women can afford luxury cars. About protecting your inventory from people who don't look wealthy enough. That's not what I meant, Brad protested, desperation creeping into his voice. I treat everyone the same way. Do you? Dr. Washington pulled out her own tablet and swiped to another video. Because our investigation uncovered quite a few interesting patterns. The new footage showed Brad's interactions with other minority customers over the past 6 months. The Latino man interested in the Porsche, the Asian woman asking about the Audi R8, a young black man inquiring about a BMW M5. In every case, the pattern was identical: dismissive body language, condescending explanations about price points, and subtle redirections toward less expensive vehicles. 11 incidents in 6 months, Dr. Washington announced, her voice carrying the authority of irrefutable data. 11 times you made assumptions about customers' financial capacity based solely on their appearance. And in every single case, Mr. Stevenson, those customers happened to be people of color. The showroom had gone completely silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant rumble of traffic outside. Even the most oblivious customers now understood they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple customer service complaint. That's… Brad started then stopped. His face was now completely drained of color. That's just coincidence. I was doing my job. Your job was to sell cars to qualified customers. Monique interrupted, her voice remaining calm but carrying an edge that made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously. Instead, you appointed yourself gatekeeper, deciding who belonged in this showroom based on racial profiling disguised as financial screening. She stood and walked slowly around the display table, her movement drawing every eye in the room. But here's what really interests me, Mr. Stevenson. After our encounter, you didn't reflect on your behavior or consider that you might have made a mistake. Instead, you went home and posted on social media about how proud you were of your customer screening abilities. Monique gestured to her staff member with the tablet, who immediately pulled up the screenshot of Brad's deleted Facebook post and projected it onto the showroom's large display screen for everyone to see. The post appeared in letters 3 feet tall, and gasps echoed through the showroom as customers and staff read Brad's inflammatory commentary about entitlement and time wasters who dress like they shop at Walmart. Thank God for common sense and proper customer screening, Monique read aloud from the post. Not all heroes wear capes, but some of us wear suits and know how to protect our dealership from time wasters. She turned back to face Brad directly, and for the first time, her professional composure cracked slightly, revealing the genuine hurt and anger underneath. Mr. Stevenson, do you have any idea what it feels like to be reduced to a stereotype? To walk into a business as a paying customer and be treated like you don't belong because of the color of your skin. Brad's mouth moved soundlessly. Around the showroom, other staff members were looking anywhere but at him, and several customers were shaking their heads in disgust. I have a doctorate in business administration from Harvard, Monique continued, her voice growing stronger. I've built a company worth over $200 million. I employ 847 people across 6 states. And yet, when I walked into your showroom wearing jeans and a blazer, you saw nothing but a stereotype to be dismissed. She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the final blow. The most tragic part, Mr. Stevenson, is that this isn't about money. It's about human dignity. Even if I couldn't afford a luxury car, I deserve to be treated with respect. Every person who walks through these doors deserves that basic courtesy. Robert, who had been standing frozen throughout the entire confrontation, finally found his voice. Ms. Williams, on behalf of Premier Motors, I want to apologize. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent our values. Monique turned to face him, her eyebrow arching slightly. Doesn't it, Mr. Chen? Because our investigation suggests this pattern has been ongoing for months, with multiple staff members either participating in or enabling discriminatory behavior. She gestured toward the security cameras positioned around the showroom. Your own surveillance system recorded these incidents. Your management team reviewed sales reports showing consistently lower conversion rates with minority customers assigned to Mr. Stevenson. The data was all there. The question is why no one acted on it until now. The weight of institutional complicity settled over the room like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about one racist salesman. It was about a system that had allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked. So here's what's going to happen, Monique announced, her voice carrying the finality of a corporate decree. Premier Motors has a choice to make. You can demonstrate that discrimination has real consequences, or you can continue to protect employees who drive away millions in business and destroy your reputation in the process. She closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. Mr. Chen, you have until 5 o'clock today to decide whether Mr. Stevenson's employment is more valuable to you than integrity, professionalism, and a $12 million corporate contract. As she turned toward the exit, Brad finally found his voice. Wait. Please, I have kids, a mortgage. I made a mistake, but I can change. I can do better. Monique paused at the door and looked back at him with something that might have been pity. Mr. Stevenson, the time for change was 6 months ago, when your first minority customer left this showroom feeling humiliated. The time for doing better was before you decided to celebrate your prejudice on social media. Some consequences can't be avoided, they can only be faced. And with that, she walked out of Premier Motors for the second time, leaving behind a showroom full of people who finally understood the true cost of discrimination. The silence that followed Monique's departure was deafening. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning and Brad's labored breathing as he stood frozen in the center of the showroom, surrounded by colleagues who were looking at him like he was carrying a contagious disease. Robert was the first to break the spell. Everyone back to work, he announced, his voice hoarse with strain. Now. The showroom erupted into motion as staff members scattered like startled birds, suddenly finding urgent tasks that required their immediate attention. Customers began drifting toward the exits, whispering among themselves and shooting glances back at Brad, who remained standing in the same spot, staring at the now blank display screen where his Facebook post had been projected for everyone to see. Brad, Robert said quietly. My office. Now. The walk across the showroom felt like a death march. Every step echoed on the marble floor, and Brad could feel the eyes of his former colleagues following his movement. Jessica at the reception desk wouldn't even look at him, and Marcus, the security guard, shook his head in disgust as they passed. Robert's office was a study in controlled corporate authority, leather furniture, awards on the walls, and a massive mahogany desk that had probably cost more than most people's cars. Under normal circumstances, Brad would have been intimidated by the setting. Today, he barely noticed it. Sit down, Robert said, moving behind his desk but remaining standing. It was a power move that Brad recognized but was in no position to challenge. "Robert, listen, I know how this looks." "No," the single word cut through the air like a guillotine. "You don't get to talk first. You've done enough talking." Robert pulled out his phone and placed it on the desk between them. "In the last hour, while you were out there making excuses, I've received 17 phone calls. 17. From reporters, civil rights lawyers, the Better Business Bureau, and 3 different television stations." Brad's face went even paler, if that was possible. The hashtag Premier Motors discrimination now has over 50,000 tweets. Our Google rating has dropped to 18 stars with over 200 new reviews in the last 3 hours. The local NAACP chapter is planning a protest outside our dealership tomorrow morning. Robert walked to his window and looked out at the parking lot, where a few lingering customers were taking photos of the building with their phones. Channel 8 News is setting up their van in the parking lot as we speak. They want a statement about our employee who celebrated racial profiling on social media. "It wasn't racial profiling," Brad protested weakly. "I was just what?" Robert spun around, and for the first time in the 3 years Brad had worked for him, he saw genuine anger in his manager's eyes. "Just doing your job? Just protecting the company? Just making sure the right kind of people get to buy our cars? That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Brad?" Robert's voice rose for the first time. "When you laughed at that woman, what exactly were you thinking? When you posted on Facebook about time wasters who shop at Walmart, what message were you trying to send?" Brad opened his mouth, then closed it. After 30 seconds of silence, Robert nodded grimly. "That's what I thought. You can't explain it because the truth is ugly, and even you're not quite ready to say it out loud." Robert returned to his desk and opened his laptop. "While Ms. Williams was presenting her evidence, I was doing some research of my own. Do you want to know what I found?" He turned the screen around so Brad could see the spreadsheet displayed on it. Sales data for the last 6 months, broken down by customer demographics and assigned salesperson. Want to guess what pattern emerged? Brad's stomach dropped as he saw the numbers. His conversion rate with white customers was 34%, well above the dealership average. His conversion rate with minority customers was 8%, the lowest on the team by a significant margin. 43 potential customers, Brad. 43 people of color who came into this dealership interested in purchasing luxury vehicles, and you converted exactly 3 of them. Your colleagues' conversion rates with the same demographic range from 22% to 31%. Robert leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "Do you have any idea how much money you've cost this company? Conservative estimate, based on average sale prices and financing kickbacks, you've personally driven away approximately $28 million in business over the last 6 months." The number hit Brad like a physical blow. I didn't realize." "You didn't want to realize. Because realizing would have meant confronting some uncomfortable truths about yourself." Robert closed the laptop with a sharp snap. "But here's the thing, Brad. Your personal growth journey is no longer my concern." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "Harold Premier called me 20 minutes ago. He's been fielding calls from the corporate board, our insurance company, and our legal team. The consensus is unanimous." Robert slid the folder across the desk. "Your termination paperwork. Effective immediately." Brad stared at the folder like it might bite him. "Robert, please. I know I screwed up, but I can fix this. I can take sensitivity training, apologize publicly, whatever it takes. It's too late for that. I have 2 kids and a mortgage. You can't just." "I can and I am." Robert's voice was firm but not unsympathetic. "Brad, you didn't just make a mistake. You created a pattern of discrimination that exposed this company to massive legal and financial liability. And then, instead of showing any remorse or self-reflection, you celebrated it on social media." He gestured toward the window, where they could both see the news van setting up equipment. "That's not going away. The story is already being picked up by national outlets. By tomorrow morning, Premier Motors will be known across the country as the dealership where employees mock black customers and brag about it online. Brad's hands were shaking as he picked up the termination folder. What am I supposed to tell my wife? My kids? You tell them the truth, Robert said quietly. You tell them that actions have consequences, and that treating people with dignity and respect isn't optional, it's basic human decency. Robert stood up and walked to the door, holding it open. Security will escort you to clean out your desk. Your final paycheck will be direct deposited minus the standard deductions. Your health insurance coverage ends at midnight tonight. As Brad stood on unsteady legs, Robert added one final thought. For what it's worth, Brad, I hope you learned something from this. I hope you use this experience to become a better person. Because right now, at this moment, you're not someone I recognize anymore. Brad walked toward the door like a man in a daze, the termination papers clutched in his trembling hand. As he reached the threshold, he turned back one last time. What about Ms. Williams? Did we lose the contract? Robert's expression was unreadable. That remains to be seen. But honestly, Brad, after everything you've put this company through, that's the least of your concerns right now. 20 minutes later, Brad Stevenson walked out of Premier Motors for the last time, carrying a cardboard box containing 3 years' worth of personal items and a reputation that would follow him for the rest of his career. Behind him, the showroom buzzed with nervous energy as his former colleagues tried to process what had just happened and what it meant for their own futures. Outside, the Channel 8 news crew was conducting interviews with customers, and the first protesters had already begun arriving with signs reading, "Racism is bad for business," and "Dignity is not negotiable." The lesson that Monique Williams had promised to teach was just beginning, and its effects would ripple far beyond the walls of Premier Motors. At 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Monique's deadline, her phone rang. She was sitting in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, Dallas's second tallest building, reviewing quarterly reports while the afternoon sun painted the city in shades of gold below her. The caller ID showed Premier Motors. "Ms. Williams, this is Robert Chin." The voice on the other end was carefully controlled but clearly strained. "I'm calling to inform you that we've taken decisive action regarding the situation with Mr. Stevenson." Monique leaned back in her leather chair, her expression neutral. "I'm listening. Mr. Stevenson's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. We've also implemented comprehensive policy changes, including mandatory diversity training for all staff and a new customer service protocol that ensures every visitor to our showroom receives consistent, professional treatment regardless of their appearance or perceived economic status." "I see," Monique replied, making notes on her tablet. "And what about the other incidents our investigation uncovered?" There was a pause. "We're reviewing all sales interactions from the past year and reaching out personally to every customer who may have experienced similar treatment. Where appropriate, we're offering formal apologies and discussing how we might make amends." Monique allowed herself a small smile. "That's a good start, Mr. Chin. However, actions speak louder than promises. How do I know this isn't simply damage control? Because," Robert's voice gained strength, "we'd like to invite you and your team back to complete your fleet evaluation. Not because we need your business, though we certainly want it, but because we want to demonstrate that Premier Motors can be the kind of company that earns partnerships with organizations like Meridian Holdings." The boldness of the statement impressed Monique. Many executives would have begged or made desperate promises. Robert was offering to be judged on merit rather than apologetic gestures. "Very well," she said after a moment. "My team will return tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. However, I'll be conducting this evaluation personally, and I'll be bringing representatives from 3 other corporations who are also considering fleet purchases. If Premier Motors has truly changed, you'll have the opportunity to prove it to multiple potential clients simultaneously. We understand. We'll be ready." After ending the call, Monique immediately dialed her assistant. "Sarah, set up meetings with Henderson Industries, Clark Communications, and Baxter Development. Tell them I may have found a dealership worth recommending for their executive vehicle programs." The next morning, Premier Motors looked like a completely different establishment. The showroom gleamed with fresh attention to detail, every staff member was impeccably dressed and professionally trained, and Robert had personally briefed every employee on the new customer service standards. When Monique arrived, she was accompanied not just by her usual team, but by decision-makers from 3 other major corporations representing a combined potential business worth over $30 million. Ms. Williams, Robert greeted her at the entrance, his demeanor respectful but confident. Welcome back to Premier Motors. The transformation was immediately apparent. Jessica at the reception desk stood to greet every visitor with genuine warmth. Sales staff approached customers with professional courtesy regardless of how they were dressed. The dismissive attitudes and class-based assumptions that had characterized Monique's first visit were nowhere to be seen. I'd like to introduce Marcus Henderson from Henderson Industries, Monique said, gesturing to a distinguished African-American gentleman in his 60s. Sarah Clark from Clark Communications. She indicated an elegantly dressed Latina woman. And David Baxter from Baxter Development. Each executive was dressed differently, Marcus in an expensive suit, Sarah in business casual, and David in jeans and a polo shirt, a deliberate test of whether the staff would treat them with equal respect regardless of appearance. It's our pleasure to meet you all, Robert replied. Let me introduce you to our sales team. What followed was a masterclass in professional customer service. Every staff member who interacted with the visitors was courteous, knowledgeable, and genuinely helpful. When David, dressed casually, expressed interest in test driving a Bentley Continental GT, he was immediately provided with keys and treated with the same respect as Marcus, who wore a Rolex that probably cost more than most cars. Monique watched the interactions carefully, noting how naturally the staff engaged with customers regardless of their appearance or background. This wasn't performative courtesy, it was genuine professionalism. After 2 hours of evaluations, test drives, and detailed discussions about fleet options, Monique gathered her group in the showroom's conference room. Gentlemen, Ms. Clark, she addressed the other executives. What are your impressions? Outstanding, Marcus Henderson replied immediately. The staff is knowledgeable, professional, and genuinely interested in understanding our specific needs rather than making assumptions. Sarah Clark nodded in agreement. I've worked with a lot of dealerships over the years. This level of attentive service without being pushy or presumptuous is rare. David Baxter, who had been the most skeptical given the circumstances that brought them together, looked surprised by his own assessment. I have to admit, I was expecting this to be a token effort. But every interaction I had felt authentic. They treated me exactly the same whether I was asking about a Honda or a Ferrari. Monique turned to Robert, who had been listening intently. Mr. Chin, I'm impressed. Not just by today's performance, but by the speed and thoroughness with which Premier Motors has addressed systemic issues. She opened her briefcase and withdrew 4 separate contracts. Meridian Holdings is prepared to move forward with our fleet purchase. Additionally, Mr. Henderson, Ms. Clark, and Mr. Baxter have each indicated interest in establishing ongoing relationships with Premier Motors. Robert's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing genuine relief and gratitude. Ms. Williams, I can't tell you how much this means to us. Actually, Mr. Chin, this isn't about Premier Motors, Monique replied, standing to shake his hand. This is about demonstrating that businesses can change, that accountability leads to growth, and that treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business. She glanced around the showroom, where staff members were already assisting new customers with the same professional courtesy they'd shown her group. 3 days ago, a single employee's prejudice cost your company millions in potential revenue and nearly destroyed your reputation. Today, Premier Motors has 4 new corporate clients and a chance to become a model for how the luxury automotive industry should operate. As they prepared to leave, Monique paused at the door where, just days earlier, Brad had humiliated her with his assumptions and prejudice. Mr. Chin, she said, I want you to know that this experience, as unpleasant as it was initially, has been ultimately redemptive. You've proven that companies can confront their failures honestly and emerge stronger. That's the kind of integrity that builds lasting business relationships. She looked around the showroom one final time, taking in the sight of diverse customers being served with equal respect and professionalism. This is what Premier Motors was always supposed to be, she said quietly. It just took the right circumstances to bring out its true character. As Monique walked toward her Ferrari, now flanked by the vehicles of 3 new corporate partners, she reflected on the transformation she'd witnessed. Brad Stevenson's discrimination had been a symptom of institutional problems, but Premier Motors' response had demonstrated that even deeply rooted issues could be addressed with commitment and accountability. The $12 million fleet purchase she'd originally planned had grown into $30 million in combined business, but more importantly, Premier Motors had become a case study in how companies could turn crisis into opportunity through genuine change. Behind her, the showroom buzzed with the energy of a business reborn, serving customers with the dignity and respect that should have been standard from the beginning. 6 months later, the transformation of Premier Motors had become a business school case study. The dealership's revenue had increased by 40% as word spread about their exceptional customer service, and they'd become the preferred luxury car provider for corporations across Texas. But the real impact of Monique's lesson extended far beyond Premier Motors' balance sheet. For Brad Stevenson, the consequences had been swift and unforgiving. Within a week of his termination, the video of his encounter with Monique had been viewed over 2 million times across various social media platforms. His name became synonymous with workplace discrimination, making him virtually unemployable in any customer-facing role. He'd applied to 17 different dealerships across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Each interview followed the same pattern: initial interest based on his sales record, followed by awkward recognition when hiring managers realized who he was, then polite rejection citing cultural fit concerns. The mortgage company had begun foreclosure proceedings on his house. His wife, Jennifer, had filed for separation after the social media backlash extended to her own professional life as a real estate agent. His children, ages 12 and 14, had been subjected to bullying at school as their classmates' parents shared the viral video with uncomfortable commentary about what kind of values the Stevenson family must have. On this particular Wednesday evening, Brad sat in a booth at Denny's, filling out an application for a night shift security guard position at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of job he would have looked down on 6 months earlier, but desperation had a way of adjusting one's perspective. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now knew exactly what it felt like to be judged and dismissed based on assumptions. In his case, assumptions about his character based on a viral video that would follow him for the rest of his life. His phone buzzed with a notification. Another job rejection, this one from a used car lot that specialized in vehicles under $10,000. Even they wouldn't risk the public relations nightmare of hiring him. Meanwhile, across town in the gleaming offices of Meridian Holdings, Monique was reviewing the quarterly reports that showed the success of their executive transportation program. The fleet of vehicles from Premier Motors had performed flawlessly, and the partnership had expanded to include 2 additional Texas locations. But more satisfying than the business success was the email she'd received that morning from Robert Chin. Premier Motors had just completed their first diversity and inclusion audit, conducted by an independent consulting firm. The results showed measurable improvements in customer satisfaction across all demographic groups, and their employee satisfaction scores had reached an all-time high. The email included a photo from that morning's staff meeting, where Premier Motors had announced their selection as Dealership of the Year by the Dallas Business Excellence Council, an honor that specifically recognized companies that had demonstrated exceptional customer service and community engagement. Sarah, Monique called to her assistant. Please draft a response to Mr. Chin. Tell him we're interested in expanding our partnership to include their Houston and San Antonio locations. As Sarah took notes, Monique's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Williams? This is Maria Rodriguez from Channel 8 News. I'm working on a follow-up story about the Premier Motors situation. Would you be available for a brief interview about the long-term impact of corporate accountability? Monique had done several interviews over the past 6 months, each one reinforcing the same message: that businesses had a responsibility to examine their practices honestly and that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was economically devastating. Of course, she replied. But I'd like to focus on the positive transformation rather than relitigating past mistakes. Premier Motors has shown that companies can change when they're committed to doing the work. The news segment aired that evening during the 6 o'clock broadcast. It featured interviews with satisfied Premier Motors customers from diverse backgrounds, comments from Robert Chin about the dealership's new training programs, and testimonials from other businesses that had implemented similar accountability measures after seeing Premier Motors' successful transformation. The story concluded with Monique sitting in her office, the Dallas skyline glittering behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows. What happened at Premier Motors wasn't really about one person's prejudice, she told the camera. It was about institutional systems that allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked. The real victory wasn't getting one employee fired, it was proving that businesses can fundamentally change their culture when they're forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The reporter asked about the viral nature of the story and whether she'd intended for it to have such far-reaching consequences. Every person who experiences discrimination faces a choice, Monique replied thoughtfully. You can accept it as inevitable, or you can use it as an opportunity to create change. I chose change, not just for myself, but for every person who might walk into that showroom in the future. As the interview concluded, Monique walked to her office window and looked down at the parking garage where her Ferrari sat among dozens of other luxury vehicles belonging to Meridian Holdings executives. The car that had served as the dramatic revelation of her wealth and status was, she reflected, ultimately irrelevant to the story's real message. The lesson she taught wasn't about the power of money or status, it was about the power of accountability. Brad Stevenson had learned that discrimination carried consequences. Premier Motors had learned that confronting systemic problems honestly could lead to unprecedented success. And hundreds of other businesses across the country had learned that treating customers with dignity wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the profitable thing to do. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, her chauffeur, reminding her about dinner reservations. As she gathered her briefcase and prepared to leave, Monique smiled at the realization that the Ferrari parked downstairs wasn't a symbol of her victory, it was simply transportation. The real victory was measured in changed policies, improved training programs, and the hundreds of customers who would never experience what she had experienced at Premier Motors. Brad Stevenson's moment of prejudice had inadvertently launched a wave of institutional change that would benefit countless people for years to come. As Monique rode the elevator down to the parking garage, she reflected on the unexpected ways that confronting injustice could create ripple effects far beyond the original incident. Sometimes, she mused, the most powerful lessons were taught not through lectures or seminars, but through consequences that force people to examine their own assumptions about dignity, respect, and what it truly meant to treat others as equals. The Ferrari's engine purred to life, and Monique Williams drove off into the Dallas evening, leaving behind a legacy that would be remembered not for the car she drove, but for the changes she had driven.